Hey guys, welcome back and welcome to part 3, the final installment of our series, my series on my 7 kind of favorite productivity tips, the things that have helped me to be most productive and to grow the most in my freelance illustration career. There already was a part 1 and 2, obviously, and of course you can watch them in whatever order you want, but I do think you'll get a better experience if you watch parts 1 and 2 first. So if you haven't done that, those are linked in the description box and you can go and watch those and then come back and join us for the final installment. But today we're very broadly going to be talking about, I guess, like setting limits or like getting limits and specificity, some of the same kinds of things that we've been talking about in the previous 2 videos, but we're continuing. The first one we kind of talked about the big ideas, the goals and aspirations, and the second one we talked about like tactics and tasks, and now we're going to get really granular into kind of managing those things at a day-to-day level and how to actually be the most productive and get the most done. So we're going to dive right into the first tip for today's video, and this is tip number 5 in the whole 7 tips, and that is to schedule your tasks. So we already talked about last week how to take a tactic or, to break a goal down into tactics, and then within the tactics to break that down into tasks. And then we also talked about how to group different kinds of tasks together, and that grouping different kinds of tasks together can make you more productive and efficient. So one other way that you can optimize that even more, another hack, is to take those grouped tasks and schedule them on specific days and specific times of day when you know that you're going to be the most efficient, the most optimally prepared to tackle them. So what that looks like for me is that I am pretty much always prioritizing tasks that require creativity. I'm prioritizing those for the morning hours. So I am my most productive by far, my most creative by far in the morning hours. So this requires some knowledge about yourself and how you actually function, and some time to reflect and think through like when you're better at working on different types of things. This was a realization I had a number of years ago where I had a tendency to want to get emails done first thing in the day, but I would spend so much time on emails and like refining them and trying to get the wording just right and have it feel the way that I wanted it to feel. And what I realized was that I was burning up my creative energy. And if I would instead paint first thing in the morning and then give myself an hour to do emails in the afternoon, I would do those same emails and they were, just as good in just a fraction of the time. So you have to do a little bit of reflection to kind of figure out how that timing works for you, because not everybody's the most creative in the morning. Sometimes people are more creative late at night. My sister, who's been on this channel a few times, she's one of those people who has her kind of like peak creativity late at night. So figuring out when those times are for you, and then blocking off your things that require the most creativity to be done during those times, and the things that require less creativity, don't burn up your creative energy on those things. Do them later, do them at a different time when you are going to be more efficient. So you'll get more done on both ends that way. You'll get more of the kind of boring email admin stuff done, and more of your creativity and your painting done. You can even put specific tasks on certain days of the week. So I tend to always have filming on Friday, because it's usually, why do I like filming on Friday? It feels the most efficient, I guess. I think, early on in the week, I am really focused on kind of knocking out my big creative tasks, the things that I most have to get done. And if I stop to film, I just feel kind of distracted by it. So for me, I tend to like to film on Fridays. And then I'll try to have, most of my heavy creativity stuff earlier on in the week. So it's I guess the week is kind of like a meta version of the day for me, where it's creativity first. Now the videos aren't creative, they are, but I'm a full-time commercial illustrator. So for me, the priority is always going to be the actual work that I'm making in videos are something that I enjoy doing, but it's something that ends up getting saved till later in the week. So think through what those days and those times are for you, and how you could kind of group your tasks together like we talked about last week, and how you could schedule those groups of different tasks for certain times and certain days of the week. All right, the next tip is to set limits. And this could be interpreted in a lot of different ways. Of course, it's important to set limits with clients, to be clear with clients, all of that. But even if you're not working with clients yet, this was a skill that was really important for me to learn personally, even just working on personal projects, because knowing my limitations and knowing what I can truly do allowed me to well, I should phrase that differently. Having the limitations allowed me to push back against something to figure out what I am truly capable of. So like a lot of artists, when I was first starting out in freelance, I had huge anxiety about the time it would take me to finish illustrations. And it took me so much time, and I was so worried that, like, oh, what if a client wants me to do it in X amount of time and I can't get it done? And there are ways, there are tips, things that I have suggested in the past in other videos for how you can approach that, how you can deal with that anxiety. But if you also want to grow and try to be a little bit more productive and try to get a little bit more done in the amount of time that you do have, having limitations can be super helpful. So I've talked about this before. I think I even talked about this in this series, but when my start in freelance illustration only came because I got sick and had to walk away from a full-time job. And so first, that was, boom, number one, a huge limitation. I had to give up this full-time career that I had. I had much less energy during the day. I was, pretty sick and in pain a lot of the time. And having those very clear, very obvious limits made it possible for me to then dial back my goals. But even on top of that, after I had kind of gone through that initial culling down process, there were a number of times. One, a very specific one, was when I did my Inktober project in 2018. And I knew that I wanted to do 31 illustrations, and I wanted to do the videos for all of them. And they were all going to be different fruits and vegetables. And I knew that in order to do that and to keep doing client work, because I was doing quite a bit of client work at that time, I was going to have to really limit the amount of time I spent on each illustration. And up until that point, I think the fastest illustration I had done was maybe 3.5 or 4 hours. And so I did whatever I could think of. I gave myself multiple limits. I said, okay, it's all going to be this on this theme. They're all going to be round. They're all going to be 4 inches in diameter. They're all going to be using watercolor pens instead of watercolor because that'll be quicker. So I had all these limitations, many limitations. And then I just gave myself, I don't even know how I chose this or why I thought I would be able to do it, but I just said, I have to finish these in 30 minutes. And it was a completely self-initiated project. It was for fun. It was to try to grow. I never would have attempted that on a client project, but I ended up being able to do it. There were a couple that took me 35 minutes, but for the most part, I got them all done within that time frame. And if you had asked me before, I would have never thought that there was any way for me to do it. So sometimes you only you are only forced to be creative enough to solve that problem if you're very aware of the constraints. So giving yourself those constraints, so maybe if you are super self-conscious or worried about the amount of time that it takes you to produce an illustration, what happens if you just say, okay, I'm going to set a timer for myself and I have to do this in, I don't know, 25% of the time that it usually takes you. Try something kind of extreme like that at first and just see what happens and see how far you get. And I think a lot of the time for me, I was not aware of how much time I had wasted while I was working on a piece, how much time I would stop and look at my phone, or even aside from that, things that are kind of more subtle time wasting things, where I'll just go back and forth or do the same thing several times because I'm not quite sure I like how it looks, rather than just kind of trusting my intuition and just moving right forward through it. And I do want to also be clear, if you haven't watched this channel before, if you're new to this channel, I do not now do every illustration illustration in 30 minutes, far from it. I still take many hours to finish most of my illustrations, but I did learn a number of key things for me. Number one is that just sometimes having a clock going for me is really helpful. And number two, working on a smaller size does make a big difference. Having the plan all laid out, having the different tasks together all laid out, those are all things that that really help me to work more efficiently and more productively. So try that with yourself. Try some different ways of setting limits and seeing what is possible within those limits, and it may surprise you. One more note on limits before we move on. I forgot that I wanted to mention this, but it's super helpful to have those limits at the really concrete, granular level that we were just talking about, but then also at kind of a more meta level, it's really helpful to limit yourself in how many things you're going to work on at once. So this is true both in terms of client projects, working on a certain number of client projects, and I think that tends to be pretty intuitive. I think most people know, like, okay, I don't want to overload myself with client work. I'm not going to commit to too many different things at once. But there's a thing that can happen when we do self-initiated work, or especially if it's, maybe several different tactics working toward achieving a goal. So I think it was last week's video, we talked about the pet portrait goal. And I mentioned in that video that you should try to only do one or two tactics initially. There's a tendency, I think, especially for beginners, to want to do all the tactics at once and to say, like, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to get it all done. I'm going to get all of this going at once and do, kind of just throw everything at it. And that can be super counterproductive because your energy is spread in a lot of different directions. Your focus is spread in a lot of different directions. So yes, setting limits in those really specific ways, like limiting your time, limiting your media, limiting your subject, whatever, those are all helpful. But also especially if you're relatively new at this, remember to set limits in the big picture as well, and to focus on one thing at a time, maybe two things at a time. And then once you feel successful with those, then incorporating other things. All right, we are on to the last tip. This is tip number 7 in the series of 7, and that is to write it all down. Of course, if you're doing all of these things that we've talked about, if you're taking your goals, pulling your goals out of your aspirations, and then figuring out the things that are getting in the way for you, if you're then unpacking your tactics from your goals and your tasks from your tactics and grouping things together and scheduling them. If you're doing all that, you're definitely going to need some place to write this stuff down. This is another thing that's pretty subjective. People have lots of different approaches for doing this, but I'm going to share just what works for me and take what you want from it. So personally, I find that I need several different types and 3 different types of places to write things down and to plan my my vocational life. So number 1 is kind of would pair along with what we talked about in lesson 1, the more big picture stuff, the big picture goals, maybe the aspirations, the kind of brainstorming and writing. That's something I tend to do a few times a year. And generally what I'll do is work on, sometimes just like a blank piece of printer paper. I do find there to be something really helpful about like actually writing things down. And I don't know why this is for me, but I am aware that I do a lot more like editing while I write if I'm writing on the computer versus just like scribbling things down on a piece of paper. There's something about the computer, like having things going like row after row after row in a document that makes me want to structure it. So I don't want to do that initially. Usually when I'm doing this sort of thing, especially if I feel like, okay, I need to get some aspirations down and then like break those down into goals. That's a very big picture kind of high level thing for me. And that I almost always will do on a blank piece of paper, just kind of doing like different word clusters, free flow, just let it out onto the page without doing any editing. And then I tend to translate that into a more organized document that I'll have like on a Google Doc or just a document on my computer where I'll take the kind of key themes from my note-taking, group them together, do some additional maybe editing, some additional breaking down of the goals, and get those all into this kind of big picture planning document. And right now I think I have a few different versions of those. I have one of those that I share with my studio assistants that is mostly all centered around content making. So mostly centered around what we're going to make for videos, what we're going to make for the newsletter, what's going to go on Patreon. So that stuff is all in this one document. And then I have, another document that's more for me, for kind of self-initiated art related goals and for maybe bigger client projects that span over a period of months. So having the big picture in a document, well, initially on a written page and then in a document is super helpful for me. All right, and then moving from those big picture lesson one things that we talked about down to the more concrete and tactical things, that's when I like a calendar and just having a good old-fashioned calendar. So when I'm in the more abstract goal, well, when I'm trying to get specific from abstraction on my document, I'm not typically putting like really firm dates on those things. I might put like a month or a season, but I don't tend to have like a calendar date that I put on those. After I've gotten them from my rough paper onto my document, then I will take what is really concrete and specific from that document and put it onto my calendar. So what I tend to do, since most of the things I work on take, are not things that I can finish in a single day. They're things that are spread across several days, especially because I group different tasks together. But I'll schedule different projects on my calendar. So I'll make it go like every day through, I use iCal, and I'll have it go like Monday through Friday is this project for this week. And then there'll be, hopefully no more than 2 different projects. But this month I mentioned I'm working on several. So each week has, I think, at least 3 different kind of big project bars going across it. That's something you can easily do with a paper calendar, wall calendar as well. I did try that at one point, one of those big dry erase wall calendars, because I thought it would be helpful for me to have the visual of like looking over and seeing which things were on which week. But a challenge for me with that is that, especially with working with clients, timelines just change. So, a client and I may agree, okay, the project is going to start on this date. It happens all the time that it doesn't start until like a week after that because they weren't able to get the reference images together, or they were waiting for some kind of a sign off, or there are all kinds of different things that can happen. But it was frustrating to me to like write things down or to get it looking nice in a written calendar and then, have to cross it out or have to move it. So I love just being able to like grab it from one week and pull it into the next week and adjust it there. So big pictures written down in a document, the tactical, the big tactics are each in their own kind of schedule bar in the calendar. And then when it comes down to the tasks, the nitty-gritty stuff that we've been talking about, that's what I put in my to-do list. So I don't usually have goals in my to-do list. I might have a tactic in my to-do list, or like the name of a client project in my to-do list, but it's more like an organizing feature. I don't tend to have a specific thing that I'm going to check off related to that. All of the tasks, the things that I'm going to check off, the things that have days associated with them, are all embedded within the to-do list. And again, personally, I do not get caught up in trying to make that pretty. I'm not trying to make any enemies here in the bullet journal community. I know there are a lot of folks who find a lot of value in making their planners really aesthetic and beautiful and using all the different pens and stickers and everything. And that is awesome if that motivates you, if that is helpful for you. But again, with the specific tasks, I run into that same issue of feeling like I was having to move things around all the time. So all I do is I just have a note in the Notes app on my computer. In the past, I've used different apps. I've used Wunderlist. I've used Things. I've used, what else have I used? It's been a little while since I've tried a new app because it takes time to import everything and get adjusted to a new tool. I probably will try something new at some point, but right now Notes works really well for me because I can just make my different, my big different headings, which are the projects themselves. And then I can have the tactics and the tasks broken out underneath them. And I can put a date right next to it. I can check it off. I can drag it. I can move it around. I can do all of that. So, every month, generally, I will have a time when I like sit down with the calendar and potentially with my big planning document. And I translate everything that's in the calendar into my to-do list. So if I have a project that's in, let's say it's a client project that's in the calendar and is scheduled in the calendar at the beginning of that month, I will put that that client project in my to-do list, and then I'll just immediately break out the different items that I know for sure are going to have to get done. So I know there's going to be image research, I know there's going to be sketches, I know there's going to be edits, finals. I put all of that in there, like we talked about when we talked about unpacking tactics and breaking them down into tasks. So I do all of that preemptively because I know that that stuff is going to happen. And then, of course, if it's a client project, and maybe even if it's a self-initiated project, there's going to be other things that come up, other items that you have to get done, and I'll just add those kind of ad hoc. Not ad hoc. I'll add those as they come in throughout the project, throughout the process. So I will have the time at the beginning of the month where I kind of lay it all out, and then week by week, even day by day, I'll adjust things as needed. You know, if I had something due on a particular day and it's not getting done that day, you know, if it's a self-initiated thing, like if I wanted to record a video, then I would, you know, bump it to the next day. If it's something that a client was supposed to get to me that they didn't, then I'll bump that to the next day, but it's super easy to do that because it's digital. Okay, I think that is finally it for this video, for this series. Let me know if you have questions. I think I've mentioned this in one of the other videos, but yeah, you can either email them to me. There's a page on my website for that, or you can put them in the comments and I'll look there too. If there are other questions, things that you guys want to know about, you know, kind of goal setting and productivity and all of that. If there's enough questions, maybe we'll do a Q&A video, or maybe like a live session over on Instagram. But yeah, just let me know what you're thinking, and let me know if any of these things were helpful for you. If you liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up and leave comments below. Yeah, and I think I already said there's links to the other two parts of the video. Yes. Okay. Thank you for watching, and thank you to Meg for editing, and thank you to my patrons for sponsoring this channel and enabling me to make videos for you guys. So that is it. I am going to move on to working on the next things on my to-do list. So have a wonderful and productive and joy-filled week. All right, you guys, I will see you next time. Bye.